Hello, everyone. It's Dylesia Barner again. I am going by Dylesia these days, like some of our one name wonders, Oprah, Serena, etc. And I'm back with another therapist takeover. Today, we actually will be meeting with Marlon Wade. He is a social worker who is going to be well, he is currently providing therapy at Radical Change Therapy. So, we're going to talk today about mother son trauma, which y'all know that I am in my bag on this subject because I love talking about mother daughter trauma. And a lot of the manifestations of that are very similar to mother son trauma with some tweaks, obviously, some gender based tweaks. So Marlon is going to talk to us about his personal experiences with that, in addition to how he helps his clients overcome it. So I just want to give you a little bit of background information about Radical Change Therapy if this is your first time tuning into one of these. Radical Change Therapy is a multi-state group mental health practice. We serve clients in Maryland, Tennessee, and Virginia, but we do have a very expansive plan to reach out in other areas as well. We were able to position ourselves as a group of people who are not just providing therapy, but also being role models about what it looks like to make sure that you are on top of your trauma manifestations and moving forward in your healing in the way that you should. So we offer psychoeducation, therapy, and also create community with our clients and help them identify and recover from something that we call intergenerational interpersonal trauma. That word is a big mouthful. It's something that I coined to describe the relationship and social experiences we face that shape how we see ourselves, God, other people, and the world. And because parents rarely hear from their trauma, hate to say that, I'm a mom, I'm working on healing from my trauma, but we know in past generations that wasn't always true for lack of resources, lack of knowledge, etc. And because of that, that means the characteristics that they have that were shaped by their interpersonal trauma end up conditioning their children because they parent from their own perspectives and then they teach patterns to their kids, whether consciously or subconsciously. And then those children go out and enjoy relationships. And I say enjoy very loosely, but they go out and enjoy relationships in the same ways that their parents do. So we end up seeing that there's no generational diversity and that friendships look the same, family relationships look the same, relationships with self look the same, etc. So that can be why you see things like multiple generations of women in a family having bad relationships with other women, multiple relationships of siblings in a family being at odds with one another, those kinds of things. So we specialize in 12 types of intergenerational interpersonal trauma, all of which you can find on our website, which is www.radicalchangetherapy.org. And today we have the pleasure of having Marlon Wade come in and talk about one of them, which is mother-son trauma. So let us welcome Marlon to the room. All righty. So he's coming in and getting on. Hey, Marlon.
Hey,
So
good
we
morning.
got Marlon here, y'all. Good morning. It is, well, y'all don't know this because you'll watch it whenever you watch it, but it's 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, which means we're really committed because, you know. So, Marlon, I've told everybody about Radical Change. I've told them about myself if they, if this is the first of these videos that they've tuned into, but I haven't given them too much detail about you because I think that you would be better at doing that. So they know your name, they know you're a social worker. Can you give them some more information about yourself and like what inspired you to enter this field?
Okay, yeah, definitely. Like she said, my name is Marlon Wade. I've gotten into this field fairly recently. I've been doing social work-esque things for probably the last 10 years now. But I just felt like I was hitting a lot of brick walls, a lot of red tape that I couldn't really pass up. And so I decided to go back and get my master's in social work and really, I guess, focus on working with middle school, high school kids, and just focusing on building up the next generation. It's what I've been doing, and now doing it in a professional way really kind of speaks to what I think I was created to do. A little bit more
Yeah.
about me. Married, 3 kids, living in Memphis. Been here about 8 years now. Originally from Chicago, so it hurts that my Bulls lost last night. But
Oh.
yeah, but yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Feel like that's kind of what I'm centered around: family, and then really helping just those kids who come up after me.
Yeah, I love that. And when you talk about serving kids too, I think this is something that me and Icy sort of discovered as she was talking through her interview, which I love. So if y'all didn't watch that, that is also on our YouTube channel. But one of the things we recognize is that there's a kid in all of us. So in addition to you like being geared towards boys, it also is helpful for your relationships with men in the counseling setting as well. Because I know you do have some men on your caseload. So, you may get boys with mother son trauma, but you also may get the adult versions as well. And a lot of inner child work is going to be necessary to happen. So I love that you have layers to what you're able to do. Okay, so we're here to talk about mother son trauma. I want to know what's your definition of that? Like when you first heard that word. So before you got into the radical change ecosystem, and I don't know if I was the first person to mention it to you, but what things came to mind? Like if you were to give a definition.
So this isn't the first place I've heard it, but when I think about mother-son trauma, specifically in my situation, which I think can be broadened just a little bit, it's just the breakdown of the relationship between mother and son that just causes, trauma or lasting effects throughout life until it's handled. And so when I look at, what that is, I can definitely see that applied to different people in different ways, but that in general is my definition.
Okay. When you said it can be applied to different people in different ways, obviously you have your own personal experiences and we'll get to those. But I want like what have you observed within mother son trauma as like some specific instances that kind of highlight that to you? Like if you were walking in the mall or, talking to somebody, having a conversation over drinks or food or something, and they gave you some specific examples, what would raise your antennas as like, oh, that sounds like mother son trauma?
So I can think of one specific example I have with someone on my caseload where um, there's just a lot of emotional distance between the two. So whenever the topic of his mother comes up,
Mhm.
even though mother-son trauma is not specifically what we're talking about, his body language changes, his affect changes. You can just see a total demeanor switch. Which to where 5 minutes before he was very, excited and talking about different things and kind of uplifted. But then when his mom's mentioned, complete switch,
Yeah.
very sullen and doesn't really want to go through things talking about her. So that's more of an
Hmm.
obvious example where it's like, okay, clearly something's going on here whenever his mother's mentioned, even though he hasn't talked about any trauma associated with her.
So you can pick up on it before the person even gives actual context.
Right. Because they give the context even
Hmm.
though they don't verbally say it.
Yeah, sometimes what I found working predominantly with women who have mother daughter trauma, people don't always know, like they kind of think it's normal where you're supposed to how do I say this? Like, you have to almost pretend like you have a positive relationship with your mom or kind of just go through the motions because it is your mom and you don't want to experience the social ramifications of it not being good. So we think about like right now it's April 15th. Again, you all will watch this and it may not be April 15th, but it's close to Mother's Day now. So, I'm thinking about my caseload and, just the women that I serve in other ways too, and how we're kind of starting to get to the point where some of those triggers are going to come up. And I call those entry points where, you look in society and everybody else is with their moms, celebrating their moms. And then you feel obligated to because you're supposed to, but the relationship may not warrant that kind of support and celebration. So, I wonder if you've ever, and it sounds like you have, where like people may not know how to articulate that the relationship isn't good, but you can point out that it isn't just by how they're like approaching it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Mother's Day, because I can think of some specific examples again, like surrounding Mother's Day. I've known some people who their mother's birthday was also around that time, and so it's a big celebration of mom, right? Mother's Day and then her birthday. And you're right, there's a social kind of pressure to, I have to do all these things for mom and be excited about mom, but I'm not. because of the trauma, because of the history that we've had, right? And so there'll be efforts at doing things for mom and making things exciting, but you can tell that just underneath the surface, the opposite is going on. You can see the kind of the turmoil in their
Yeah.
actions. That outwardly I'm doing this, but on the inside, like I'm dying because of having to interact with this person.
Yeah, for sure. And it really tears you apart. I mean, because I've had my own experiences with that too, and I've been very vocal about that. And this is not about me today, it's about you. But I know how that feels to internally be, ripping yourself to shreds, but you're doing it and you're like, it's only temporary. Just get through this day. But then you think about like having to recover from getting through that day, and it takes far more than a day. And the reason why I call it an entry point is usually when we look at Mother's Day, Mother's birthdays, holidays like Christmas or Thanksgiving. Sometimes people don't talk to their moms at all until those times.
Right.
But then when they talk to them, they re-enter the cycle of trauma, and it's like it's gonna take you months until you realize I shouldn't be talking to her because this is what talking to her actually opens me up to. And then by the time you have stopped again, it's another holiday and then you're right back in the same sort of cycle. So it's very interesting, like, to look at it from a scientific standpoint, and or scientific but also very psychological, and just kind of observe how patterns are with moms that are toxic or abusive. So, going back to you, tell us specifically, as much as you're comfortable, about what that has looked like for you personally, and not just like examples, but also what have the mental health ramifications been?
Mhm. Um, so starting with a positive, I guess, I'm on the other end of my mother-son trauma. There's still some lingering things I have to work through, but um, we're in a much better place than we have been, which I didn't expect. So as far as
Good.
the ramifications, I think that um, I've dealt with depression in the past, and again, still have some of those lingering effects. And I think that the mother-son trauma for me was a big trigger of that. Um, just noticing, where it started in my childhood, and from that point, noticing just the distinct difference in the person that I was. So this lively, upbeat kid, social talking to everyone, and then once this trauma and these, instances started happening, just noticing the switch of, isolating myself, not wanting to be around others, kind of what we talked about before, having this outward, everything's okay, but on the inside, just not able to,
Mhm.
get out of the bed. Um, and so for me, it's just been the fight of getting through that funk and kind of escaping from having to fake it, and be able to sit and live with that, which has taken a long time, for most of my adult life now, fighting through that, to really be the person I want to be outside of the mother-son trauma for me, has been big.
Yeah. What so as I'm, listening to you talk, and I kind of assume that I might know what viewers could say, I'm wondering how you reconcile identifying that mother son trauma is like the culprit of some of those emotions you were feeling without venturing over into blaming. Because that's
Mhm.
what I hear from a lot of people. It's like, I'm an adult, it's not my mom's fault. I gotta, I'm a man in your case. So how did you navigate that? Because that's a fine line.
Um, so for the longest time, I was on the other side of that line. I definitely blamed a lot, and switching back and forth. There was times where I blamed her completely, and then times where I blamed myself for everything that happened. And so blaming on both sides of it. But I just got to the point where I was tired of the cycle. We talked about kind of the toxic cycles, and I got tired of it. And so I had to make a decision to really say, like, no, obviously both of us have blame in this, and really do the work to go back and think through things, and eventually reach out and talk to her, which was, I think, the biggest part of the healing process, to start those hard conversations. And at that point,
Yeah.
I could step back and look at myself and see, okay, you've had a part in this, and so has she, um, and really just kind of start the healing work from there.
hmm I love that she responded well, because I think that people watching could be on either end of the spectrum where they have a mom who's like, kind of just waiting on them to do the best they can. That's one of the things I realized when I was navigating or trying to navigate it with my mom. So, for all those out there who don't know, me and my mom are actually estranged. I haven't spoken to her in probably just about 3 years. So, and I'll say we haven't spoken to each other because I mean, she hasn't contacted me, I haven't contacted her. And I desperately wanted, at the time for her to respond well. And one of the things I had to realize is like, she's doing the best she can, but are you? Because
Mm.
I was giving her the same energy that she was giving me back. You know, like if you're going to be lackadaisical with us, so am I. But it was hurting me because I knew that I could do more. And I knew that she didn't have, you know, that she was resource deprived. And by resources, I mean like mental, emotional, spiritual resources, because she grew up in a completely different time and had her own trauma to contend with. But, you know, even out of having those tough conversations with her, she was not like receiving them. You know, everything was my fault in her mind. And I know that it was a self protection mechanism. So I ended up recognizing that, like, this is not a safe environment for me, and it never will be. And if I actually want to move forward and not move forward in a brokenness, then I'm going to have to sever ties with her. So I want to know if you have any, you know, like words of advice or wisdom to somebody who may be on the other side of their mother-son trauma where their mom wasn't open to those conversations.
Mhm. One thing I've learned just in life in general, but I think specifically with this, because even though I am on the other side of it, that doesn't mean there wasn't a lot of hard conversations. That doesn't mean there wasn't
Mm-hmm.
times where she wasn't receptive and I had to take a step back. I really think it just boils down to doing what you can. And if she's not being receptive, then you're both adults. Even though the dynamic is there to where this is your mom, this is someone um, you love or at this point may not love because of the trauma. And so that kind of pressure to please or to reconcile is there, right? But I think at some point you have to, value your own health, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and say, if it's at the point where she just won't respond, she doesn't want to reconcile,
Mm-hmm.
but I've done the best I can, and the relationship is no longer up to me to fix or up to me to reconcile.
Right.
Um, and so yeah, I reached that point a few times, and kind of sat in that and was content with being estranged, right? And then just
Mm-hmm.
over time, just in my own personal journey, we were kind of brought back together, and just kind of had these cyclical clashes of will this, won't this, and eventually it worked out. I know that's not everybody's story, and so I don't want to make it seem as if A plus B equals C. If you do this, it'll work, but just knowing when to set that boundary for yourself and say enough is enough. And if something happens past this point, it's up to her to make the move.
Right. I love that you said that A plus B doesn't, you know, always equal the same C. It's some C, but C
Mhm.
can be curved differently depending on the person's life. So I love that you said that. And then also something else that stood out to me is that you set boundaries and you waited for her to come around, which I think is, you know, something that as children we don't learn how to do. You know, it's like your mom's way or the highway. If she's
Right.
mad, it's your responsibility to figure out how to make her happy. And I saw that you didn't do that. You let her sit with the whatever, you know, whatever emotions that they were, and then she had to be the one to come back and say, okay, you were right, or let's chat about it and discover a way that we both were wrong and navigate that together. And I think that that's very, very key. And I can also relate to that too. That didn't really end the relationship with my mom. We had a counseling session and she did come. She was very open about the fact that prior to coming that she did nothing wrong and she would continue to stand on that. But I still was like, okay, come on to the session. And she came and, you know, it went horribly. And the last thing I said to her was, well, it doesn't sound like you're willing to take accountability for the things that you've done. And for me, they've shaped who I am. So if
Mhm.
you don't acknowledge them, then you're not acknowledging me. And until you're able to acknowledge me, you know, I don't know that we have much more to say to each other, but my number will remain the same. Feel free to reach out when you're ready. And that's just been for years from there. So, you know, granted, I don't know if she'll ever reach out. Knowing my mom, she probably will not. But, you know, it wasn't like this hard, fuck
Mhm.
you, you know, and we can cuss
Right.
on this because I be cussing. But
Okay.
it wasn't that. And I think that a lot of people view estrangement as that kind of energy. Like
Uh-huh.
you have to hate the person or like, you know, they just can never ever exist. They just, you know, don't matter in the world. And I don't think that that's always the
Mhm.
case.
Yeah. I've lived in both of those worlds. I lived
Mm-hmm.
in the fuck you type of world where it's like I want nothing to do with you. But then I think more often now, even though we're healing, I think we kind of live in that space of okay, we've had enough. Let's back away and just exist separately.
Mm,
And so I can still acknowledge her. I can still reach out, um, but there's no constant relationship, um,
right.
which is an improvement for us, like I said. But yeah, so I don't think it has to be either or it can be from time to time. And so it
Hmm.
just, like I said, looks different for everyone.
Yeah, it's a flux. I mean, it's a relationship, and they're all fluxes. So, what do you think moms, or what do you think sons want from their moms? Will be the first question.
Um, what I think sons want from their moms. I really think that connection and approval is huge. Um, I mean, from both parents, obviously, everybody wants the approval of their dad, but I think moms specifically with sons, there's just a nurturing that we want to feel. Like we want to feel like, our mom loves us, our mom sees us, our mom hears us, and we can reach out to her in that way. Um, and I feel like that can be the breakdown sometimes of the relationship. We want to feel
Yeah.
like we have the approval of our mothers. We want to make mom proud, is a big thing. And so I think those are, like I said, just the triggers that kind of hurt us the most when we don't get those things. Mom doesn't approve. Mom isn't proud
Yeah.
of me. Mom, isn't affectionate or doesn't love me. I think those hurt a
Hmm.
little bit more when it's mother son. Yeah.
Yeah. And what do you think makes moms unable to provide the things that you just mentioned,
Um, gosh,
or unwilling sometimes?
yeah. Um, I think a couple reasons. I think just not being taught that. I noticed, I know a couple of moms just in a different generations that just weren't given that nurturing from their moms or their dads, or down the line, the generational just breakdown and trauma that they've experienced, to where they don't know how to love, they don't know how to show affection, they don't know how to just to do those things, to really speak into their children. They're not taught that. And so if as a mom you're not taught to nurture and speak affirmations into your children, then when they come back and say, hey, this is what I need, and you're like, I didn't know you needed that, or like, I'm doing the best I can, and then the breakdown starts. um,
Hmm.
and so I think that sometimes mothers feel like they're doing the best that they can, and so then when extras added onto it, they get defensive and they feel like it's a personal attack, when that's not the case. I just want to fix what this is or work on this, and not
Yeah.
saying that you are the problem, but what you're doing is the problem. um, as in general, we don't want to do the hard work, I feel, of just working on us. And so it's hard to get people to see that they're not the issue, that what they're doing may be the issue.
Yeah.
Some people are the issue.
Yeah, but usually it's what they're doing and then them not wanting to acknowledge that makes them the issue. So it
Mhm.
still goes back to the behavior, right? And you bring up a interesting cycle that I often see is not just with mothers and daughters or mothers and sons, just with any relationship, where if someone brings up something that they're unhappy about, it's almost like a natural tendency to also bring up something that they did wrong. So if I'm
Mhm.
like, well, Marlon, you didn't support me. And you're like, well, Dylesia, you also didn't support me. And then we don't get anywhere. It's,
Right.
let's focus on the matter at hand. And then if you
Mhm.
still have some grievances to discuss after we resolve this, then you can bring those up. But more than likely, it's you really don't. You just don't want to sit in the discomfort of being the person who has to be held accountable. So
Right.
I think that cycle plays itself out a lot in mother-child relationships, and it's probably one of the things that makes it so hard to find compatibility in those dynamics.
Mhm. Yeah, I can definitely look at my relationship with my mom specifically, and that's what that was. Whenever I
Mm-hmm.
did get past the point of wanting to please her and wanting to get her approval, um, which I mean, part of me still does. It's my mom, right? But once I got past the point of giving a shit about it, I would confront her, like say, hey, you did this, or these are kind of the things that really didn't work growing up. And there was that instant defense. Well, you could have done this better, or like you didn't reach out, or
Mm-hmm.
A, B, and C, or you and your brothers. And it's like one at a time. Like, I'm dealing with you right now. If there's things I did wrong, I can acknowledge that and I'm willing, but let's do that at another time, because then I'm just not being heard. And so the cycle just continues.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned something interesting earlier that I want to go back to. You said that, she had her things that she was to blame for, and then you also had yours. And you might have a different belief than I do. So I believe that as it stands, like parents are initially always to blame. Because, like, I cannot say that my 10-month-old daughter's upstairs, who should be sleeping right now, but sound like they're not, but that I cannot say that they're to blame, right? Like there's nothing that a 10-month-old is doing wrong. But what I do see is that, over time as they grow up, and I'm not really talking about my daughters, but over time as children grow up and things are not communicated, resentment starts to build in. And then we start these passive aggressive cycles of like, really not communicating what's wrong.
Mhm.
And then that's when you start kind of racking up blame. So
Right.
even if the initial person was the parent, it's like after a while it gets really messy, and then both people have done things because you've like responded to the
Mhm.
fact that you're dissatisfied with how your parent is showing up. So that's why I always am encouraging people to, if they can, have those conversations as soon as possible, because what guilt will do is just make you feel more obligated to remain in the cycle of toxicity. Because you're
Mhm.
like, well, she did this, but I also am not that
Mhm.
good.
Yeah.
And that's not good for anybody, because in reality neither of you deserve the relationship that you two have,
Mhm.
created together, but like let's work together to make it better.
Mhm. Yeah, that I can definitely agree with that. That's like a really good piece of advice, to start as early as you can, because me and my mom really didn't start our kind of reconciling process till I was in my mid 20s, and so you have all
Mm-hmm.
this time of this trauma kind of building up, and me reacting to the things she's done or the kind of the lack of communication, which added on to it. So yeah, she was definitely
Yeah.
to blame for the initial trauma and kind of the steps she took to create that dysfunction. But once I became responsible for myself and could then choose how I reacted to it, I did a lot of shit that didn't make it any better. And so
Mm-hmm.
I gotta, man up and put that on myself. But yeah, I definitely can see the difference and just wish, like you said, that I would have started earlier because it would have
Yeah.
so much could have been avoided.
Mm-hmm. That Chicago came out, I'm sure. So so also, to go back, I asked you, what do you think that sons want from moms? What do moms want from sons from your observation? I know you're not a mom, so it's simply conjecture, but what do you think that they want?
Um, I think in general, I think moms want sons who are responsible, and not just they do what they're supposed to do, but just as
Mm-hmm.
men that they're growing into. She wants to see an example of a man. Um, yeah, sorry, just an example of a man that they could be proud of. Moms want to see
Mm-hmm.
sons that um, can protect, sons who can reciprocate that nurturing if they're doing it right. Just who are well-rounded and holistic, I think. Which a
Mm-hmm.
lot of us, because of different traumas, don't have the holistic health. But I think moms just want to see examples of men that they would be proud of in their sons and see those traits kind of developing. So sons who'll be honest, sons who'll be vulnerable with them. Yeah.
Okay. I think that was good. And it actually, as you were talking, I was just thinking about different mother son relationships that I've been privy to. And it made me want to ask if you can speak to the differences between what moms want in a son and what they want in a partner. Because I
Hmm.
think that's where, just like in society, we see things go wrong, where it's
Hmm.
like, yo, this not your husband, sis, it's your son.
Right.
So what is like vulnerability or protection look
Hmm.
like when it's your son versus your husband or romantic partner?
Hmm. Right. And that's the kind of the breakdown I was having, because as I was describing
Hmm.
what mothers want from sons, I'm like, I'm just describing her husband.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just
You were.
like I gotta um but from examples I've seen, both healthy and unhealthy, like some of those traits still do cross over. And so I think with what mothers see in sons versus partners or husbands, um, I think obviously she wants all those things in her husband, right? The protection, the affection, the vulnerability. Um, but I think from her son, I think she wants to raise somebody who will be that example. And so she just wants to see those traits in him. It doesn't necessarily have to be,
Mm-hmm.
with her. She doesn't have to be, completely vulnerable with her or affectionate with her in that manner. But I think she wants to see those traits to where this is going to be someone's husband someday. And so I want to make sure that I'm
Mm-hmm.
raising somebody who can function in that position. But there is a fine line. And we've both probably seen examples of moms who are using their sons as the head of the household in that way, and
Mm-hmm.
that just blurs lines, it creates boundary issues, and then she's creating dysfunction in him and not even knowing it. She's trying to fill a need that she
Right.
has. So I think the roles are very similar, but one is more separated. Okay, this is who I want to build you to be, but hey, like hubby, I need you, I need this right now. Like you need to give this to me. So
Hmm.
it's a fine line that I think
Yeah.
not navigated that well.
I think it's tough. Yeah, it's not usually navigated very well. There aren't, and I always say to my clients and just to people in general that like the hardest boundaries are the ones you have to set with yourself. So, in full transparency, like my husband right now, he's in residency. So, sometimes that might mean 24-hour shifts and we go a day without seeing him. And, that might mean that at night I'm like, dang, I really wish that I could cuddle with the girls instead of them sleeping in their own beds. But I always am like, no, because long term, you don't want to breed a codependent relationship with your daughters where they have to come in and give you emotional affection because you don't have the person to do it.
Right.
And I know that that's hard. I only have to do it for 24 hours, whereas somebody, that's the reality of their life. So it can be tough to like conceptualize that. But I know that for me, I'm just super intentional about making sure that I'm allowing them to be my child instead of be something else to me. And that's a boundary I have to set with myself that often is really hard to set because I get lonely or I'm like, dang, one of my daughters, she is like the best cuddler ever. And my other one, she just is like, okay, I got to go. Like, it's time to explore. But my cuddle one, I'm like, girl, I could use a cuddle right now because mommy had a bad day, but I just am always like, no, you can't do that, Dylesia. You can't use her for that. And I think that that is because I have worked hard to be in a mentally healthy place to know that that's happening. And then also to have like the mental fortitude to be able to stop myself. Whereas I think that that's something you have to build up to. I wasn't always like that. Maybe if I would have had children earlier in life, I would have went and got them or, slept in the bed with them and things like that and created some of those like codependent habits. So, I think it just goes back to how we were raised and like what we were taught. And boundaries are something that your parents are definitely responsible for teaching you. But like, how can they do that when they weren't taught it? They can learn, but then how many spaces have we truly been introduced to that are there to teach you those things? Besides radical change, I have not seen it. So, and I'm not even tooting our own horn, but like I created this because of the deficits that I noticed in life.
Yeah. I mean, it's okay. Shameless plug. Radical changes is killing it on that game. But I really do think that you're right. Like we're not taught that. We haven't been taught that. And so when you're operating out of that deficit, it's the best you can do. Like what else do you know? So just thinking back over, me and my mom's relationship and then going back to her and her mom and then just going through the line. Like I can think as far back as I know that there was just that dysfunction. There was that survival kind of attitude to where, I don't have time to nurture you. I have to make sure that you survive. And I have to survive. So setting those boundaries is essential. But like you said, if we're not taught them, then we're just going to keep operating out of what we know. If we keep doing what we've
Yeah.
been doing, we're going to keep getting what we've been getting.
And boundaries for someone who is used to enmeshment in families, boundaries feels like punishment. So I remember there were clear boundaries we had to set with Nigel's mom because, I married Nigel probably a couple years before he graduated from med school. And I knew that once he graduated, like the way that his mom navigated the graduation and that entire situation, she was upset that I was going to get the credit for him being a graduate of med school and not her. So like we noticed little things and we ended up having a conversation and it was a little heated. Portsmouth came out, which is a lot like Chicago, although people don't necessarily know Portsmouth very well.
Right.
But, I was like, I'm sorry that he's your son and not your husband.
Yeah.
And that stung for her. Like she never talked to me about it, but she was very open with him that like, a lot of the things Dylesia said were true. And I think that breakdown happens almost everything I can think about within a family kind of traces back to the lack of a two-parent household. And I don't even mean like lack physically, because sometimes you can have someone there and they're not fully there because they don't know how to be there. But whenever there's that breakdown with the parents, it ultimately trickles over into the kids.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because that was kind of the example in my households where, it was a two-parent household, but none of the things I needed came from my dad, which which made it harder because I have this almost non-existent relationship here with my dad, and then this toxic kind of traumatizing relationship with mom. So then there was no outlet. It was either have nothing or have kind of this sit in this toxicity.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, yeah, that's where it started. It created kind of those cyclical things to where I can't really trust either one of them to give me the things I need. So that's where I
Hmm.
became very isolated and very independent. So I feel like if I need it, I have to get it for myself, whether it's emotionally, relationally, physically, whatever it was. Like, it was on me because I couldn't get it from either direction.
Hmm. Yeah, and it being on you is hard. Like, I mean, you look back and you're proud of yourself once you do get to the other side. But it's like, dang, that was a lot of work because trailblazing ain't easy.
Yeah.
Like, my heart goes out to all trailblazers because I can understand. So, what would you do, with a client? And I'm sure there are so many interventions that you can think of. So you don't have to give us all of them. And there are even some that I've thought about as you've talked. Like, for instance, I know you mentioned conversations that you had to have with your mom. I'm thinking like writing a list of those with your therapist, and kind of role playing what those would look like. Of course, we don't necessarily know what mom is going to say, but like to reduce the anxiety of going into that conversation blind, practicing that with the therapist. But in addition to that, what are some other things that you would do with a client who came in with mother son trauma? And let's say, like, if they were an adult man versus a child.
I think before we even get to the how they would interact with mom, like they're gonna have to do the work on themselves. They're gonna have to um, really focus on where the kind of the source of that relationship kind of broke down, and really work through just the foundations of it, because we can't work on, how are you now going to approach mom when we don't know what led to this, so we can't really fully unpack how you're going to react to this. And so I would definitely on the front end do a lot of the hard work, with digging into what's the source of this, how are you going to, like, what triggers are going to come up for you, as we talk with mom. And then once we get to the point where they feel like they're, I guess, settled in this decision to, okay, I'm going to reach out, I'm going to, get in contact and try to do this reconciliation. I definitely think, I mean, you mentioned role playing and writing it down. That's big for me. Just because I want to be prepared, right? I don't want to go into anything, figuring it out right there in the moment. Um,
Yeah, no.
yeah, you don't know how she's going to react, you don't know how you're going to react. And so you definitely want to be prepared for that. Um, I think bringing in, if you have the supports around you, bringing in others who've seen the same thing, I think is big, because they see different facets of the relationship, and they can see,
Mm.
um, really just knowing both sides well is going to help in their support. But I feel like if they don't have those supports, then you as a therapist really need to just prepare them with, what are you going to say? How are you going to say it? What's going to come up for you? Doing that role play is going to be big, because it gives them the opportunity to feel it without feeling it, to, prepare and kind of practice
Hmm.
before the match, before they get into the game. So sorry, I'm just getting a little congested. Um, but yeah, I
We
think,
can't hear it, or I didn't hear it at least.
okay, well, it's bothering me, so I'm glad y'all can hear it. But yeah, really just focusing on that preparation of, whether it's writing it down, whether it's rehearsing it, whether it's, doing journaling, whether it's doing kind of that CBT and thought blocking, because the negative thoughts are going to come up when you're thinking about these relationships. So thinking
Hmm.
about the thought blocking and replacing and everything. I just think it's really important to be in the mental space to navigate those waters. Um, and so, yeah, I think I would definitely start there and kind of tweak it as we go, because as we know, each person is going to be different and go through different things. So,
Yeah, well, I will say that God must love what you're saying because, like, there's this halo over me right now. So, can you see? It always happens around this time of like the day. There's a window right here, so I look, I don't know, angelic or something, or like a ghost. I don't know which one. I'm going for angel though. So,
just, yeah, you're just better than
but
Ghost.
no, I think you highlighted something amazing about change that I would hope that therapists do, but I've worked at a lot of practices and it's not done. But like you've broken down that it's not just jumping from where you are to where you want to be. There are stages. And, I think that we do a really good job at Radical Change of capturing that. And that's why our clients experience the success we do. So, first of all, we do treatment plans, and I have not seen that in a lot of practices. And then additionally, when it comes to the way we set our goals, they're very structured. And then there are three levels of intervention for each goal. So there's a preparation intervention, there's a process intervention, and there's a practice one. And they almost, mirror what you said here. We're like, we're first going to talk about what happened, how you perceive it, do some psychoeducation there, get you prepared for how you would react to certain things. Then we're going to start, working on it. We're going to start practicing it. Like, what do you need to put in place structurally to support you being able to have this conversation? What players can we bring to the table so that I can understand more about how this relationship is outside of how you tell me, but then also so can you. So I just love like the breakdown, because I think that the best therapy is one with someone that thinks systematically like that.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things I think that drew me to you. We were in our interview, and it was almost like you knew the questions already, because the way that he organized his answers, I was like, that is a good organization. It was literally like an outline. And I had no questions after, because you had like laid everything out for me. And you've also gotten, some feedback from clients already about how organized you are. And I think that that's important. That's an important skill for a therapist to have, is to be organized, because your client is going to come to you and just blurt
Mhm.
it all out. And that's
Right.
what they're supposed to do, because I know I do that in therapy. And you take it and you put it in its little boxes and package it all together nicely. So I'm just happy to like point out that you do that to whoever's watching, because I think that again is, like I said, a skill that you want your therapist to have.
Well, I appreciate that. That's definitely something I've had to build. Um, I think just
Mm-hmm.
me in general, and then with a lot of the stuff I've been through, disorder was kind of my comfort zone. Um,
Oh, me too.
so yeah, that's a lot of work was put into that, but I appreciate that. And I think, like you said, that's necessary because, um, with all the trauma that goes on, just, I mean, everyday things that we deal with, order is not, what we thrive in normally or what we see from day to day normally. And so for you to come into a therapy relationship and just dump everything out, you want somebody who's going to take the disorder that you bring and make it order so then you can see that and start healing from there. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, I mean, I have loved this conversation. I can't imagine that anybody watching would not also enjoy it. If so, you're a hater. But no, we love joking around here. So y'all,
Mhm.
that's why y'all see bits of humor. But again, I've loved this conversation, and I was saying this before you came on, that my goal is to bring therapists into radical change that aren't only able to do therapy but are doing the work themselves, because
Mhm.
then we're able to do something that is the most effective thing that I think leaders can do, which is lead by example. So you are certainly one of those people, and I can tell already, and we still have so much of each other to get to know. So I just want to honor you for that, and then ask if there are any last minute things that you want to leave with the audience before we wrap up.
Um, well, thank you. It's an honor to get to be here. We've had some good times already. Um, I really think that it's okay. Um, a lot of us are coming at these things from different perspectives and different just circumstances that we've grown up with. And at times you may feel like it's not okay to be here. And I think it is. Like it's okay that you're feeling the way that you're feeling. It may not feel good, but I think that you're in the position now, since you recognize that, to really do something about it. And so specifically here at Radical Change, I know that there's people here who have been through those things, like Dylesia said, and who've done the work themselves. And so we can help you in that journey. It's hard, but it's okay. Um, the cliche of nothing worth doing, won't be a little difficult. Like it's going to be hard if it's worth doing. And so the work's going to be hard, but I feel like you're in a good position with realizing that to take the next step and figure it out. Um, if you need somebody in that journey, that's what we're here for. I appreciate you guys listening. It's definitely been fun. There's a congestion. It's definitely
I
been,
heard it.
yeah, I know. I'm like, really in the last couple minutes, get it? Okay. Sorry. But it's definitely been
It's
fun.
okay.
We're having a good time. We're human, so things happen last minute. We got ghost halos and congestion. It's okay. But
That's
no,
funny.
yeah, I really appreciate you guys listening. just hoping this can be either the next step in your journey or the start of your journey or wherever you are. Just know it's okay, and you can take your time in doing that.
Amen. And I'll just throw this out there, and I know we're spiritual. We've had spiritual conversations before. So how Paul had the thorn in his flesh,
Here we go.
you can't just be perfect. So you got your congestion. I got my halo. Just keep us human, Lord. We understand.
I'd rather have the halo, but yeah, I'll take it as a thorn in my flesh. I'll do that.
All right, y'all. Well, that was amazing. If you are interested in services with Marlon or anybody from our team, there'll be a link in the description box on how you can book a consultation and start your process. So thank you again for listening. This has been a Therapist Takeover with Marlon Wade, and we appreciate you.
Thanks, guys. Have a good